Good Vibrations.
Welcome to Good Vibrations Volume 237. It's shortly to be my born day. I don't use the term birthday anymore. I'm training myself away from that. And almost 3 years ago, I had the idea of having a meaningful roundtable discussion to mark the occasion of my born day every year. It's not been going too well. I haven't really kept up with things on that front, but there's no reason why this can't be the starting point. So geographically, we're going all over the place with this one. So it's Northampton meets Huddersfield meets Cambridge meets Rhode Island, is it?
It is.
Yeah. Meets Louisiana, Jason?
Yepper.
Meets wherever Wayne is. Where are you, Wayne?
Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Pennsylvania.
There you go. So that's 3 different time zones, and we're jumping around all over the place. So I'll go round the table and introduce who I've got on with me today. So first off, the hosts of a very popular podcast, which many of my listeners will be familiar with. We're crossing over to the US for Crrow777 Radio. We got the man himself, known as Crow, and we've got his co-host, Jason. Welcome, fellas.
Hey, thanks so much for having us.
Pleasure to be
Sure
here.
thing. Also in the States, we've got Wayne McRoy of the Alchemical Tech Podcast. Welcome along, Wayne.
Thanks, Mark, for having me on. Always a pleasure, my friend. It's been a while since we spoke last, so hope all is well with you, and always good to be part of a panel discussion like this. Thanks again.
Cool. Well, whenever anyone asks me how I'm doing, I always say I'm up and down like the Rolling Stones, but I suppose we all are. And the remaining guests are the co-hosts of another very popular podcast, this one from the UK, and again, a couple of voices that will be very familiar to many of my listeners. It's Dom and Chris of Sheep Farm Studios. Welcome, fellas.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having us on.
Hi to everybody. Thanks for having us on, Mark. Hi, everybody on the panel.
So there'll be subtitles for the Yorkshire accent on the video version. And glass of red, Chris?
No, it's a bit early, Mark. Not tonight, to be fair.
Is it? You're holding it down?
Yeah, till later, yeah, maybe.
All right. All right, then.
Disappointing.
So it is a bit bloked out today. And in retrospect, it would have been good to have had a couple of female voices in the conversation. But it does seem to be a fact that the podcast game is a bit bloked out, a bit manned up, generally speaking. We could probably do with some more women contributing shows and podcasts, don't you think?
Yeah.
It's a bit confusing, the opposite sex now. How many are there?
I know, right? It used to be.
There's
simple.
2. You just got to check.
Yeah. You just got to give someone a shake. Yeah.
As Wu-Tang Clan once said, can it be that it was all so simple then? So
that's lift. That's a. Where's that from, Jason? That's listed.
that's a sample.
Oh, okay. I was going to say that's lifted from somewhere.
Yeah, I think it was a soul record that they sampled on that Wu-Tang joint. But I know how you feel about hip hop, Crow, so we won't go there.
It's not just hip hop.
Okay. So the reason I selected you gentlemen as my guests is because I've heard you all address the subject in hand today at some point on your shows. And the basic premise is this. When we accept that popular culture is all controlled and used to push agendas and programming, particularly at a corporate level, and particularly when we may have been hardcore fans of music or movies previously, what meaningful higher-minded replacements can we adopt to fill the void if we decide to let all that go? So I think to start off with, we'll go round the table and I'll start with Dom and Chris, because I've heard you say on your shows that whenever you watch a movie these days, the surface narrative, the exoteric meaning of it that's put out there for the masses, flies completely over your head, and all you can see is the programming and the symbolism. And you're sort of watching the film going, oh, I know what box that's ticking, I know what agenda that's pushing. So for you two guys, does that mean that you can no longer enjoy these popular culture vehicles as straight escapism or entertainment in the same way that you used to?
You want me to go?
Yeah, go on.
You go, Chris.
Well, I've always been an avid cinema goer. Like, I think I was never into sports, so one of my obsessive things, if you like, was mainly comics and film and music, of course. But I don't go to the cinema like I used to. I think I did go and watch Avatar 2. But again, I'm just looking for the agenda woven into it, if you like. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know if I'm sure, but I can't say I'm sure, but even that film, I'm pretty sure the end, in my suspicion, some of it was AI, I think, especially the end. There was a very strange bit at the end. And, you know, from looking at some of those AI pictures that are around, it looked like it could have been. And you think, old James Cameron, who made it 5-10 years in the future ahead of us, is it feasible that some of that film were AI? I think maybe it was, because it had kind of a coldness to it as well that I've never seen before, if you like. But I still watch films, but I just watch them very differently. I don't. I know there's every film's got an agenda in it now. And I was saying to Dom the other day, it's funny because if you think of old films where they'd have the script and the production value, and it was like the effects were trying to catch up. Now they've got all the effects they want, but the films just seem soulless, don't they? You know, some of the crap that's pumped out on Netflix and stuff, it's got nothing, there's nothing in it. Even compared to some of the films from the 70s. But then music-wise, I mainly listen to jazz. So I kind of don't listen to any pop music. I used to listen to a bit of hip-hop, but not that much. But mainly old soul and jazz. I don't know if that's affected or not, Mark.
Do you see any obvious agendas being pushed in jazz, in modern jazz?
I don't really listen to modern stuff. I only listen to old stuff, to be fair.
Right.
I don't. One thing I do notice on Jazz FM, which is an English radio station that I still listen to, they're always plugging Jamie Cullum, who's a little white dude, and he's like the poster boy for Jazz FM. And you think all those old.
He's the Ed Sheeran of jazz, isn't he?
He's the Ed Sheeran of jazz, yeah. And it's just bizarre when you think of all this talent that's gone and, you know, come and gone, and then they've got this little munchkin doing, and it's terrible. Well, it's my opinion anyway. Some people might like it, but yeah, I mainly listen to old soul and jazz. I don't think I've got any new music at all, to be honest with
you. Yeah, they have their approved ones.
Yeah.
To me, the only genre that I can still listen to, which doesn't show any signs of obvious agenda pushing, is soulful house, soulful uplifting house. A lot of it is gospel influenced.
Yeah.
It's what I play in my Sound of Now show on Mixcloud every week. And what you were saying there about movies now just being so full of AI, that's why I love movies from the 70s, the 60s.
Yeah.
You think of something like, one that always comes to mind for me is Aguirre Wrath of God, directed by Werner Herzog. And it starred Klaus Kinski.
Ah, yeah, the one with their boats.
Yeah. The conquistadors going into South America, and they had to really film that. So everything you see on screen, they're in waterfalls and rapids and, you know, climbing mountains. They really had to do that, and that gives films from those eras an authenticity. And these days, it's just cheating with AI. So,
well, it was like that to fight to make the films then. Even some of the ones that probably have got a bit of programming in them, you did get the impression they did struggle to get them made. Whereas now they're just churned out left, right, and centre. And I can't believe how bad some of them are, to be honest with you. But again, I still dip in every now and again. But I watch with definitely with a different eye.
Yeah. So, Dom, before.
Hold on, sorry, Mark.
Yeah, sorry. Before the Sheep Farm or Crow podcast came along, I used to learn a lot about culture creation and lifetime actors from the work of Jan Irvin. You familiar with that guy?
I've heard of his name. I've not really looked into him, no.
Yeah, he used to do shows with Joe Atwill back in the day, Unspun podcasts. And I remember him being asked by a show host once what he liked doing in his spare time. And he said, oh, well, let's see. I like research and, digging through books and stuff. And the host said, no, Jan, what do you like doing in your free time? And he's like, oh, well, research. And he's like, no, when you're not doing research. And he's like, well, that's all I do. I've kind of heard you make a similar comment that.
How did you know I was going to say that?
Yeah, this is pretty much all you do now, I think, isn't it? Pretty much.
Yes, pretty much. I can't listen to anything, to be fair. I can't watch TV. Just it's pointless. It's just casting spells in your mind. You're wasting your time and effort, in my view. I've got loads of music. I used to have a recording studio, me and my mates. Don't listen to music anymore.
Don't maybe it's great for family life, does it?
Not really, no. Used to be into sport. Don't listen to sport. I still train and exercise and things like that. But yeah, it's it's a real wet fish around the face, a giant halibut.
Yeah.
And yeah, but the void is filled by research. Basically, I was research on morons like George Orwell, things like that, and Aldous Huxley, as we're doing now.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
it sure does fill the void.
well, the excitement I get is finding out that George Orwell's bloodline is linked to so many kings and queens that kept me up about 2 weeks ago on a Sunday night. It used to be going clubbing, but now it's George Orwell's bloodline.
Yeah.
Pretty sad.
How times have changed.
Yes.
Were you like a big clubber, big dance music fan?
Oh,
going
yeah.
back to your youth?
Yeah. Ibiza, the Hacienda in Manchester, as it was back then in the early 90s. Yeah.
Back to basics.
Right
Leeds?
into it. Back to basics Leeds.
Yeah.
Chris were more into back to basics Leeds.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to go all over. Quite an exciting time, but when you look back now, that was the last of the freedom. If you called it freedom, even then, looking back, as we know, there were certain controls then, lots of controls. But now we're seeing, I think Crow was saying in one of the last shows I listened to about all this AI coming in, the programming that's the 15-minute cities we've been talking about, you've been talking about, Mark. You're famous now, you're on Panorama. I don't know if the guys know that you've been on Panorama, which is the BBC.
Yeah, feed the trolls.
Yeah. Feed the trolls, yeah. You must
Are you the troll in that scenario?
Oh, I'm the guy that was born in Oxford that was on BBC Panorama last week. So yeah.
With respect, or were you there to be kicked?
No, well, they featured part of the Freedom Rally in Oxford of a few weeks ago, and they chose to include part of my speech. To be fair, they treated me fairly well because they just said, here's some of the messages, and they put out part of my speech. So they didn't particularly savage me in a way that they did Richard D. Hall, another great researcher from the UK. Yeah. They've really done a number on him.
They have.
But yeah, I was featured on that. So, Don, when you think back to those days of those happy days of clubbing and enjoying music and stuff, how do you view them now? With nostalgia, with a sense of sorrow that those days are gone? Are you just glad that you've moved on and you know what you now know?
I'm glad I know what I know now. I would have swapped it to know this a lot earlier in life. You could have made a lot better decisions of where you were going and what you were doing, and the people you were around that drag you off in different directions, etc. Clubbing was great, but now in the first Brave New World Order episode 1, I think we showed that was part similar to the 1967 Summer of Love in the US. It was all orchestrated, so we were all part of a program. Sadly,
that's right. So, Crow, you've done many shows of late which have been quite disparaging of the popular music and many of the bands that you yourself came up on in your formative years. And research has shown that few of them, if any, are who you thought they previously were. And when you realise that they've just been agenda pushers for the forces that gave them their career breaks, and the only reason they were famous is because they were chosen to be famous, it becomes a bit difficult to respect them anymore, doesn't it?
Well, there's a myriad of problems. One of the big problems for most people who listen to what we're talking about and give a damn is a thing I call nostalgia program. As far as I know, that's with you. How you choose to deal with it is one thing, but that's with you till the end. Are you ever going to forget the Zeppelin album you were listening to when you got your first kiss or something like that? And this nostalgia programming is a big part of it. But when you come to realize what it is, it's, I don't know, to the 5 stages of grief match. I mean, when you're done crying, you have to do something. And what I came to realize later, after a long period of I'll have nothing to do with any of this, and I began to realize that I was sucked in on one side while I was being programmed, and then I self-fenced myself out of everything on the other side. Music is music. Music has always been music. And what we're concentrating on is bad people who did bad things with music. And good music can still be found. I bought a mandolin, started learning how to play. I played my own songs. I purposely changed genres because I came up on rock and roll and punk rock for a period when it was new. And what I began to realize in my later life is programming is commensurate with how many people are paying attention. If you get a blockbuster hit out of Hollywood, that's loaded with programming. If you get a band that's going diamond or platinum, that's loaded with programming. So one of the things I did later is I started listening to bluegrass and other smaller things that don't have the audience. And while they're probably contracted, a lot of them, there's a lot less to it. But when I think about movies, one of the ways I learned to deal with it is to watch foreign films that are older, because the programming that might have even been there doesn't really apply to you because you're culturally separated. That's not always true, but in this country, older films, they too had programming, but a lot of the programming is behind us now, or what they were trying to program at the time. Like as an example, the Cary Grant era where everyone's been broke from 29 because they crashed the monetary system, which they're doing now. And they got all these rich people like Cary Grant on the screen, getting people to love the more elite side of the house. But you go back and you learn how to deal with it. And I'm with your other two guests. I'm with Dom and Chris. I can't watch new movies. It is so rare when there is I don't even consider it cinema, to be frank with you. The definition may claim it's cinema, but it's something else. It's soulless. It's empty. It's devoid. It's completely aimed at getting to the idiocracy as quickly as they can. There's no subtext. There's no clever plot twist. There's no storyline. All that's out the window. And so, I can't watch TV and haven't for a long time for these reasons. And what happens over time is the amount of time I deal with media is reduced by 95% or more. When I do, I might go back and watch something like Lawrence of Arabia because I'm looking at a real place in the world that was actually filmed. The programming is there. They're trying to push their version of what happened in the Middle East in that particular film, but that's behind us, right? That's just an attempt to get history remembered in the way they want it. So those are some of the things I do. Immediately, what I realized is when I was young and I loved Zeppelin and these other things, in my mind at that point, all other types of music were inferior because I've been programmed that way. And so now genre is not a problem. I take music, whether I like it or I don't, on what I'm hearing. I got into bluegrass. I've gotten into a lot of old classical music. Classical music presents a huge problem because after you learn to appreciate it, and you do have to learn if you've been used to rock music or any music with hooks and little tricks to get you to like it and repetitiveness, what you realize is that music isn't even in the same ballpark as what I grew up on. There's music theory, there's complexity, there's real musicians playing that music. And so these are some of the things that I've noticed and that I've done. At the end of the day, when you realize these things, you're probably going to cry for a while. Then you're going to be pissed off for a while. Then you're going to ignore and shut it all out of your life for a while. And then when you start to recover from all that, you've got to make your own decisions. And being aware of what we have become aware of removes you to some degree from the programming, but we all sitting here know if you're listening to it, you're not immune. There's things going on that you probably don't even know are going on. But what we're doing here is a step in the right direction, because 10 years ago, nobody would be talking about these things. Nobody knew.
Exactly. Even 5 years ago, probably. I was watching A Passage to India the other day by David Lean, the same director as Lawrence of Arabia. That's a great movie, actually. It's about the days of the British Raj in India, but it's got spiritual aspects to the story and a few sort of life lessons. So that was a great movie, but that was 1984 of all years. So that's how far you have to go back to find movies of that nature.
Interesting, it's 1984 as well. Orwell and all his family were part of the British Raj.
Do you know why that date matters? Has anyone come across why 1984 matters other than the book?
They
I've
tell
been-
us it's the reversal of 48, don't they?
Well, what I've been told by people who actually get to read the European top secret meeting reports is that it's the 100-year anniversary of the formation of the Fabian Society.
Yeah.
That's why it is.
It's strange because we've been covering the Fabian Society because the Huxleys were married into the families that actually started the Fabian Society up.
Yep. So there's the connection. It's 100 years to the day or to the year.
It's intriguing.
Eric Blair, Tony Blair, both Fabian socialists. Just a coincidence.
Yeah.
So
Always a coincidence, Mark.
Indeed. Wayne, I've been listening to a show which you did a few months back where you were reading and offering commentary on Dave McGowan's book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. So when you first came across what McGowan was talking about there, were these shocking revelations to you about how none of the so-called heroes of the 60s counterculture were who we thought they were? Or had you realized for a long time by then that corporate music is utterly controlled and contrived? What first alerted you to that?
Well, basically, I'd always known for the longest time that the controlled nature of the music and the film industry. So I've always kind of had that inkling for a very, very long time now, probably going back to the early 2000s at the very least. But it wasn't really shocking to find out just how contrived it was. Now, McGowan did a fantastic job connecting dots and putting two and two together with a lot of this stuff. So just the nature of just how deep it went, especially in that one particular area at the time, that is kind of where it became more revelatory for me. Just how concise they are with the programming motifs that they use. So that being the case, I mean, I still to this day, I listen to music all the time. I still enjoy the music because a lot of music still has some positive influences to it. And that's the whole point here. You can't throw it all away just based upon the things you know. Now, I'm thankful for the things I know about it, but at the same token, I'm not going to let it squash my joy. And that's the point where a lot of people get when they come to the realization of just how controlled and contrived the music and the film industry are, how the social programmers have done their job there. They get to the point where they want to step away from it. They want nothing to do with it anymore. And that's understandable. I think we all go through that. It is very similar to the stages of grief, like Crow was talking about. It sure is. So at some point, you get beyond that. And I was bound and determined. I'm not going to let these social engineers squash my joy in my life. And music can bring a great deal of joy. There's something archetypal about it. There's something primal about it. It's an important facet in the human experience. It's like listening to the soundtrack of our lives. If you go back and you think about these different eras that we've lived through. Now, I'm a child. I was born in the 70s, so I'm largely a product of the 1980s. So, having said that, I sure do have some nostalgia programming still in set with the 80s music, and that is one of my favorite genres to listen to is the 80s music. But understanding what's been done with it and knowing what has been done with it, it gives me a clearer insight into what is really going on with the way that they've used it, the way they've attached these soundtracks to various movies, the way that they've used different song lyrics that you used to think were nonsensical. And that's something that's changed through the years. We used to, growing up, we would sing the wrong song lyrics all the time and not understand what was being said. And when you go back later and see, hey, I've been singing it wrong all this time, then you realize that, something is up with many of these lyrics. So when you come to that realization, it does give you a new viewpoint to observe this stuff from. But I'm not going to let it destroy my joy. So I do enjoy music, and I will sometimes watch some movies. It's a rare occasion anymore if I watch television or watch a movie at all, especially anything newer. I generally don't do that, except to pick it apart. I mean, I kind of sit on the same type of fence as Dom in this situation. That's all I do is I research. That's where I find my joy and my passion. I research. I pick this stuff apart. That's exactly what I do. I'll pick out the little esoteric nuggets out of it that I know are there, And this is how I find entertainment in it. And it's different from how your average person comes away from it. They just watch it as a form of escapism. I don't see it as that. I see this as doing my due diligence to point out the ways in which they're manipulating society. So people get aggravated when they go to the movies with me, but you know, it is what it is.
Yeah. Escapism
But that's my
from mind
take on
control.
it. Right. That's what it is. I'm just trying to let people know, hey, do you understand the subtle way in which this is programming you or steering your mind in a certain direction into a certain type of fantasy, type of reality? So that's what has largely been done here. And the music aspect of it was something that did bother me for a long time. But like I said, I'm not going to let that deter me from enjoying something I previously enjoyed, just because now I know that the vast majority of the industry is controlled in some way for social engineering purposes. So, you know, that being the case, we could still find some enjoyment with these things. It just looks a little different because now we're like, hey, I see what you did there. I know what you're talking about now with this. Whereas in the past, when I was a stupid teenager, I didn't know a thing, but now I understand. And now I could point it out to future generations so they understand what's coming across their screens that they're watching or their speakers that they're listening to, so they could understand the subtle ways in which these social engineers work and how they manipulate the masses in the way they do and how they create popular culture. It's a contrivance. Popular culture is a contrivance, and it's all steered from a very small position at the top of the power pyramid. But that's my whole take on that kind of a scene.
And a question which I often get at the end of my talks and which I get via email is, should we still be listening to music by the likes of the Beatles or the Stones or the Doors or Led Zepp or Bowie, whoever it may be, now that we can see how these characters were charlatans to a large extent and being used? And of course, each listener must answer that question for themselves, and you just have their Wayne. But people also point out that this is the very best music that you're going to hear, at least in terms of how it's produced. You know, the Beatles had the very best producers, and so did many of these other acts. And that's because being chosen ones, having been selected to push agendas, they got the very best resources with money no object thrown their way, so that the product would sound so great and be so appealing that as many people as possible in the general public would gravitate towards it. Same thing with movies. So you also mentioned there that music is a very primal thing. It taps into this inherent part of the human condition where we seem to gravitate towards rhythm and such. And with movies, it would be gravitating towards visuals and symbolism and stuff. So all of that's been weaponized. But it's down to each individual as to whether they can separate that from the product itself and still draw some enjoyment from it.
Right. And that is a tough challenge for many people to do. That's the whole point here. You could still enjoy it, but understand what's being done with it. Understand the social programming aspects of it. Now, if you could separate those things in your mind and step away from it and understand what's being presented to you, then you could still derive some type of enjoyment out of it. Like I said, in my case, I enjoy picking out the little bits of programming in the movies now. It's a different way of watching movies than what it used to be. And the same could be said with music. Like, I'll listen more carefully to the lyrics and I'll listen to the different portions of the music where it's extremely repetitive, where you get your same power chords over and over again in different sections of the song, and just the different ways that it's put together. It's a cycle. It's to cycle your mind into this and get the message tapped into your subconscious with this whole thing. And sometimes it's subtle, especially with music. At least in the older days, it was a little more subtle, the things that they did. But now, I mean, it's nothing subtle anymore. And I think that's where the disconnect has come, and how many people are waking up to this. They're not subtle about anything anymore. They're beating you over the head with it, like just blatantly, and they don't care. It's all out in the open. I mean, we're living in the time of revelation, no doubt in my mind. The veil's being lifted away. They're just out in the open with the things that they used to do in the dark before. And they were a lot more subtle in the past. And this has influenced us in many ways that we still probably don't realize, even unto this day, going back as far as we can, at least, if you gentlemen are around the same age I am. Like I said, I was born in the 70s, primarily a child of the 80s. So I've had an awful lot of social programming done to me through the years. And I recognize that now. And some of it, I'm sure, still is in the background there. And I don't realize the ways that I've been manipulated still. And that's the nature of this, because it's a generational game with these people. They play the long game with this stuff. So things that our generation was programmed with are slightly different than what the next generation was, and the next generation and the next. So this generation coming up now is unaware of the programming we've had. And when we go to point it out to them, they don't get the same kind of reaction or meaning out of it as we would. If you talk to somebody around your own age who's had the same programming you have in their early years, they'll recognize more so than a younger person would, because they weren't there. They didn't experience it. They didn't have the emotions attached to it. They didn't have that nostalgia factor like Crow talks about. So that nostalgia programming is a hugely important thing. And it looks different for these younger generations now, because they remember things very differently than we do during the same time periods. Like if you talk to any of the so-called millennials out there, they have a different point of view than we do. Even though we lived through those times, they were socially programmed differently in their youth than we were as grown adults at that point. And
actually,
this
think
is
where sorry, mate. The transhumanization that you guys talk about, I know you've done a lot of stuff on that. The lobotomization over generations of people gradually has led them to this point where they can whack people around the head with the obvious truth. They've lobotomized people to such a point now that they can get them banging pots and pans in 2020 on a doorstep to basically poison themselves. That is how far they've dragged people under the bus.
But wouldn't it be great if we could somehow find a way of making it cool among young people to spot all the symbolism in music videos and movies and stuff like that? There are small pockets of those sort of communities that spot this stuff. Occasionally I see a TikTok video and they're taking apart the Grammys or the Super Bowl and spotting all the satanic symbolism. It'd be really great if we could get young people to kind of try and outdo each other in terms of what they spotted and say, oh, I saw a pentagram in that movie. Oh, is that all? I saw a Baphomet and pyramids and all sorts. It'd be really great if that could become part of youth culture, to break all that mind control stuff and learn how to spot this symbolism, wouldn't it, if there was a way of achieving that?
I think Wayne was just about to hit on something there, if I'm not mistaken.
Sorry for interrupting you, Wayne.
Oh, no, that's not what I meant at all.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
Wayne rarely misses the point. And what I have noticed, and I think probably what he was about to mention, was that what you can see in the changing of the programming, and if you take a millennial, the intelligence level, the introduction of idiocracy, idiotic ideas, and lower morality is being piled on thicker with each generation that passes. And we notice this. And the problem with this kind of thing is, yes, you can pick out the programming. There was the kids watching the music awards not too long ago, and it was the greatest of all time, right? It was the Golden Goat, and, they're having their heyday. And that's on the surface, but what was in the content itself was mind-lowering. And some of it was a bit shocking. And this type of programming works a dream. When you see something shocking, you are shocked. When you see something shocking 1,000 times, you are no longer shocked. And that is how they mainstream shocking things. But the big problem for the people that are coming up behind us now is to avoid the idiocracy. They're literally being stupefied. They are literally having their intelligence lowered by being invested in what's put before them. And by the way, in the age of AI, if you don't think the frequencies, the colors, the flicker rates, and everything else they're putting in is serving the agenda to gain that idiocracy, I would suggest that these are really some of the huge hurdles. When I think about myself, if I was a young teenager or a young 20-year-old now, how would I make it? Because I remember what I did in the era that I lived in. If I was facing what these young people are facing now, I'm not so sure I would come out the other side as well as I did. And that's because of what we're talking about. So to see the programming, like, yeah, they're pushing a satanic thing, that's one side of it. But the flicker rates, the colors, the physical delivery that has been clinically worked out to have an effect to put you to sleep, to put you into alpha waves, to stupefy you, then the content itself, which is lowering intelligence, and then the normalization. And one thing I noticed, and I'll use Zeppelin again as an example, when we were young, it ruined classical music for me because I was used to, we have a chorus, we have a bridge, we have a hook. Almost every song does it. They all follow the same pattern here, right? And so what's the hook? What's the chorus that we'll all remember? And so the complexity in what I thought was complex music, right? Zeppelin's complex, isn't it? So I thought, here, this is complex music. Well, go listen to Beethoven if you want complex music. Go listen to Chopin. And the problem is I realized I could no longer appreciate that other stuff until I stepped back and pulled myself away and then learned to look at it for its merits. I would suggest, from my point of view, one of the biggest things facing the generations behind us is how are they going to avoid the stupefaction? Because we got it, just not at the same level they're getting it.
You don't listen to much Fetty Wap, Megan the Stallion, or Drake then?
I don't know what those things are. Old man
you're
shakes his fist at cloud.
Yeah, I bet Jason listens to them.
Well, let's bring Jason in because there were some things touched on there, which was we spoke about CGI and the way that's been utilized in movies to transform them, and the way that frequencies are used to change music. And obviously we're in an era now where everything's done digitally, electronically. And you're a musician and producer yourself. You're a technically minded guy, a bit more so than me. And I would imagine that you employ a lot of digital ways of working in your studio. So how do you feel about the way that everything in society has gone digital? Do you think it's a double-edged sword, that it can have benefits but also drawbacks? Do you think it's headed in a dangerous direction? Or, how do you feel about the whole way that society has been moving in that electronic direction?
So I absolutely think it's a double-edged sword. All these things are tools. I can do things now digitally, sitting at my little desk, that I'm looking at these couple of gadgets that I've got, that I couldn't have done even remotely close to when I first started learning studio stuff in the 90s, because it was still tape based. So there's things you can do now that aren't good or evil. They're just more convenient, like the editing capabilities. I remember the first time I used Pro Tools, I was absolutely blown away with the editing capabilities and how easy it was just to get rid of all the little in-between hiccups, and if something was a tiny bit at a time. Like those kinds of things, that's not good or evil. That's just production. So our production capabilities are far more advanced than they were 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Now, that being said, the things you can do with them, if you want to use it for darker purposes, is a lot easier now. You don't have to do crazy stuff like backmasking through tapes and all these crazy things you have to do with bouncing tracks and all that sort of thing. You can put anything you damn well please in there. You have virtually unlimited amount of tracks, so you can hide stuff like crazy in there. So that's just my take as far as music production goes, or even cinema production, because I started learning that when I did the documentary with Crow. And I saw just how easy it is. You can give an image any look you want, any color you want. You can emulate just about any kind of film you want. So it's very similar to the music production, that the digital is it's a tool, and you can make things as clean as you want, or you can make it as garish as you want. So it's all very interesting. We live in a time when the tools are there. It's kind of like some of you guys were saying earlier, all the effects are there and all that kind of stuff, but the stories are absolute crap. Well, the stories don't have to be absolute crap. That's just what they happen to want to put out. If we had a 25-year-old Steven Spielberg or George Lucas or whomever you want to pull out of the past, who are putting out the movies that became these blockbuster staples, if they were doing that today, obviously their approaches would be a little different, because they wouldn't have to struggle so much. George Lucas was literally pioneering technologies to make the Star Wars films. And that was his big complaint when he saw the first of the new crappy Disney ones, was like, you didn't do anything different. I mean, they literally didn't do anything different. They just mostly copied the first original Star Wars film because they weren't interested in pioneering. They're literally just making product and content at this point, and that content is heavily laced with whatever bullshit propaganda they want to shove into it.
Right. How are you on nostalgia, Jason? I think you're one of the youngest among us here. And my take on it is that I can't stand to listen to too much old music anymore. Not because I know who the artists are anymore so much, but just because it transports me back to a happy place, happier times. And I realize that those times are gone and they ain't coming back. And so I find it quite painful to listen to old stuff for too long. Do you have a lot of nostalgic attachment to music of your past that you came up on? And can you still stand to listen to it?
You know, that's interesting. That's another double-edged sword kind of thing. Because I look at a lot of things from a production standpoint, because I'm always trying to improve myself as a studio guy. I look at things from multiple angles, because a lot of the stuff I listened to way back when, some of it I don't even care for anymore. For instance, like when I first was becoming a teenager in the 80s and in the early 90s, I was listening to things like Kiss and stuff like that because my older brothers and cousins were listening to that. I don't even care about that stuff anymore. Later on, as my guitar playing skills improved and I started becoming a singer-songwriter, I started liking different kinds of music. I started listening to things like the Beatles and Pink Floyd, stuff that was technically better. I would say far better songwriting capability was there than say a band like Kiss, which is mediocre at best. So I kind of have my nostalgia is very all over the place, but the one thing I've been able to really get myself to be able to do is very similar to Wayne. And Wayne and I actually come from the same place. We've known each other literally since we were very, very, very little because we have family that intertwines. I can, for the most part, distance myself from the knowledge that I know that there's a lot of nefarious stuff that goes on and has gone on for decades with a lot of these people, but I can still appreciate the music or the films or whatever happens to be. Like I could still watch the original Star Wars and appreciate them, which is the exact opposite of what they're cranking out now, which is just awful. Or for instance, I always kind of make the joke that's not really a joke. It's like, I'm still going to listen to Dark Side of the Moon. It's an awesome album. The production is absolutely incredible for the time period. And the songwriting's there. And I don't know if the guys from Pink Floyd were mixed up with a lot of the Beatles-y kind of stuff. I don't quite see the same fingerprints, but I don't rule it out. But I'm still always going to be able to appreciate that. That's great music, and I still listen to it when I'm in the mood.
That was a trap then, wasn't it, Jason? It was actually that good. It trapped you into it because it was quality. Whereas now it's trapping you into it because there's nefarious things programmed into the film that you don't know about on the MK Ultra screens, if you like.
You know what's interesting about a lot of the youth today? I noticed that, and Crow and I have talked about this on the show, even with other guests, we brought it up. It seems that like the 90s and into the beginning of the 2000s, there were decades and there were very definitive lines. Yes, they blurred over as things changed between one decade to the next. But for the most part, you could look at the 50s and know it's the 50s. You could look at the 60s. You could look at the 70s. You could look at the 80s. You get up into the 2000s and things are just kind of meh.
Exactly. It's all homogenized, isn't it?
Sterile. I think that's the word.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's all just kind of mishmash now. And I'm seeing the same thing with the youth today. Like my daughter's 20. She listens to modern stuff, but at the same time, she's got Pink Floyd and Beatles and a bunch of other stuff that I like all over her Spotify playlists that she'll put on while she's working. So it's that kind of notion where it's like there isn't one definitive thing now. Like if you're talking about in the late 1960s, it was that psychedelia rock music that the vast majority of the youth were into, that was pop music for lack of a better term. But today it's not like that. It's all over the place. You're going to have your people who like rap. You're going to have the people who like your whatever the modern Britney Spears kind of stuff is. Like it's going to be all over the place.
Who's going to be listening to Ed Sheeran in 20 years going, oh, those were great days. Oh, he was amazing.
People with no taste.
Well, yeah.
Somebody might be. Yeah, somebody might be.
Here,
Actually,
you guys are being anti-ginger. Someone going to call you out.
I was actually humming mentioning Britney Spears. I was humming a Britney Spears song a while ago. I couldn't even name a Britney Spears song. I mean, Mrs. went, why are you humming Britney Spears? I said, am I? I didn't even
Yeah, but you've made Britney Spears bloody slang now.
Yeah, we have. Yeah,
Britney Spears gets you out of YouTube bans these
yeah,
days.
it does. Yeah, yeah.
So there can be a great popular culture shaped hole left in our lives if we decide to throw all that stuff out. And then a meaningful question arises, which is, what should we do to replace that? And I'll give this one to Dom and Chris. Would you agree that we reach a certain age in life? I think we're all in our we're in our 40s and 50s here, where a natural and healthy thing to do becomes to throw light and fluffy entertainment out of the window and instead give ourselves a bit of a checkup to ensure that we're on the right road towards living a fulfilled life and contributing something worthwhile to others and to creation rather than just fulfilling our own personal tastes. Would you say that in a life well lived, you reach a point where you start considering these things, and so there's a natural tendency to start chucking some of this entertainment out? What do you think?
Go on, Chris.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I still dip into films, but I do struggle. I actually struggle to watch them now. I don't, I can't. I used to just be able to sit and watch anything, and I can't anymore. Like I said, I've retracted. I think the music, I used to listen to some house music and stuff when I was younger and soul music or whatever, but I've retracted backwards.
We're part American, aren't we, Chris? We've got American blood running through us. Probably from New Orleans, actually, originally.
Yeah, we were apparently. Well,
I don't have whippets there.
No, they don't have whippets there, no.
Yeah, we've got a right combo going on. We're 25% Black American. Actually quite weird because when I was a kid, I always liked jazz, and Dom always liked soul and jazz. And we were in the countryside in Yorkshire. But I remember thinking to myself, this is strange. I was renting music out from the library, and I got into jazz. And I remember thinking, it's weird. I like jazz. None of my family do. No one I've ever met likes jazz. Anyway, flash forward years later, we met our.
They obviously you didn't look at yourself in the mirror, did you? And see your nostrils.
Years later, when we met our black cousin from America, and they were from Chicago and New Orleans. He said they emigrated up from New Orleans. But he was massive into jazz, knew everything about it. And I just thought, was it some kind of genetic connection, maybe? I don't know. But I went through my most obscure jazz collection and he knew it inside out. It was bizarre. Weirdest thing. Anyway, I went off point there, didn't I? Sorry, Matt, what was the point again?
Well, is there a natural tendency to throw entertainment and popular culture out, do you think, when you reach a certain point in life? It's just not as important as it was when you were younger.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think you when you're younger, you're almost programmed to be obsessive. Like, for instance, you won't listen to certain music, because this is what I listen to, and you to divide everybody, you program. I only listen to that soul music, and I won't listen to that one. I only listen to rock music, and I won't listen to that. As you get older, you'll kind of dip into anything and not mind so much. Not as offensive to you, is it? But like I said, I've retracted right back to old jazz recently. But I work in kitchens as a chef, so I see a lot of these younger end, because a lot of them are waiters and waitresses and stuff. Some of them are switched on to old music, and some are just absolutely not. What was I listening to the other day?
Ed Sheeran.
Britney Spears, by the sound of it.
No, I was listening to, I think it was Bobby Womack or something, and this girl went, "Oh, what are you listening to that crap for?" And I said, "What are you listening?" She was listening to The Weeknd. Is he an American guy? Yeah. And I said, "Well,
The Weeknd."
The Weeknd. And I said to her, "Well, what you're listening to here was probably inspired by what I'm actually listening to there just 40 years ago," which it basically was. But I don't feel like I've got any connection, it doesn't hurt me anymore that films are shite and music shite. It doesn't bother me anymore. I'm happy to accept it, to be honest with you.
I mean, the hardest one for me was accepting that certain DJs weren't who I thought they were. I used to look up to Pete Tong until he took an MBE and he played at the bloody Coronation concert at the weekend, so he's gone. Tim Westwood, we won't talk about him.
He's definitely gone.
No,
I had quite a shock recently when me and Don were doing the Huxley stuff, because we were on about George Orwell, and I've read all his books, and I like it's probably the last fiction book I read, wasn't it? I've read 1984 a good few times. And the realization that it was probably an asset, it's kind of, that was kind of, it wasn't shocking because it was probably pretty obvious, but to actually find out for a fact, it changes it a little bit, I suppose. It's another one of your heroes, but like you said about the DJ thing, I mean, that we were around in that period, and it was all just a little bit too. When you think back now, and you were made to feel it were all grassroots and it was all just happening.
We're all organic.
Yeah. All organic is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, but then I remember going to the Ministry of Sound in London, just thinking this isn't organic.
It was like going to a supermarket.
Like going to a supermarket. Yeah.
Opened on the autumn equinox of 1991, but it's just a coincidence.
Right.
It's a coincidence, Mark.
Because I went there from Yorkshire, Mark, and I remember thinking this is like something I've never seen before. This is like, say, like a supermarket popularized version of what I'd seen up north. Really
it was sort of like the B&Q or Pets at Home of clubs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. TK Maxx of clubs, yeah.
And for UK listeners, Lance at Rise Above has invited me to do a talk at their Academy in September, their live event on the UK acid house rave scene and how that might have been not quite what we were led to believe it was in terms of its organic roots. So I'm looking forward to getting into that one.
I mean, one aspect of that, Mark, is you can get a load of youngsters, like in the 60s version, put them all in a room, you can trance them with whatever music you want, and also deal whatever drugs you want to them as well.
That's right.
So,
they did it in the 60s with LSD, and they did it in the 80s with MDMA.
Yeah.
Same template.
Yeah.
So, Dom, when you used to be out clubbing and raving as a young man, did you used to see middle-aged dudes, 30 years older than you, throwing shapes and out there with all the young people on the dance floor?
With the Zimmer frames, yeah.
And think, what are these guys doing up in this rave when they should have retired years ago? And did you ever think that it was possibly a bit undignified for individuals of that age to still be acting like they're 20?
Yes, 100%. I thought it were ridiculous. There's a few in Ibiza at the moment. But going back to what you were saying about sort of giving back, me and my wife I've got Lyme disease, and we set up a clinic to help other people with Lyme disease. So that is, I suppose, some karma, if you like, giving back to the world. We use a lot. I know the guys do a lot of shows on health, and we have a natural health clinic in the UK doing ozone therapies. We've got some nurses working for us, so we're using their skill sets that were destroyed by the NHS in something positive. So that's something positive you can try and give back to people. And it's so there are things you can do, going back to positivity, to use your energies and your skill sets for a benefit, if you like, rather than thinking about negative things all the time. Let's face it, the things we uncover are all. I never uncover something I think, wow, fantastic. I'm really glad I found that. None of it is happy news, is it? To know that your whole life's been a lie. And that is what we're sort of saying.
And you've got your series at the moment on the Huxleys and everything they've been involved with. And there were some surprise connections tying into dance music and acid house and rave and stuff, which people wouldn't necessarily expect to find. But, certain roads led you to that kind of material. So it never really disappoints, never gets boring, does it?
No, it never gets boring. That's one thing for sure. We're just going to release one on the Doors called The Doors of Deception. I think I sent it you over, didn't I, to listen to?
That's right, yeah.
And the Ray Manzarek character was an obvious intelligence asset. He works for military intelligence at secret radar bases. And interesting story, wasn't it, Chris?
Yeah.
And then when I did the genealogy on Jim Morrison, it goes back to his Scottish ancestry. So Dave McGowan did some fantastic work uncovering that his dad was a rear admiral, etc. But his actual his uncle, his grandma's brother, was even further up the pecking order as an admiral than he was. That was quite interesting to find, and is also related to a lot of the royal bloodlines in Scotland. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, that.
And when you get into acid house research and early days of British dance music, you find a lot of toffs, a lot of these public schoolboys, enter the frame. You know, there's the guy that opened Ministry of Sound or funded it, James Palumbo, who's now a baron of Southwark. And you got all these bloody public schoolboys that used to run the raves, Tony Colston Hayter and people like this. And it's all characters that you wouldn't expect to find moving in those circles and in those walks of life unless they'd been put up to it.
Well, and you wouldn't see them in them clubs either, Matt. They wouldn't. Yeah. They weren't in those clubs. It was
exactly.
You know, they weren't those kind of folk, was it?
No, yeah, you didn't see them in a warehouse, do?
No.
No.
Yeah. Snorting coke in some West End.
Well, I'm sure they were doing that, but it's these characters, whether they start out organic and then get taken over, or whether it's part of a plan from day one, we will probably never know that. We'll never be in that meeting, will we? But certainly, at some point, there's something that's the Faustian bargain that's signed somewhere down the line, and it's taken over, whether forcibly or by some sort of deal that's been done.
Yeah,
that's what it always seems to go in everything. But I suppose we're talking about something totally different now. We always go down that road, don't we?
No, but that's a key point, because people, when this first happens and you become aware, it's human condition to hate them. The hero that I used to have, I now hate. Look what they did to me. And they're victims. A lot of them are victims. Who can argue that the Beatles were old enough to make rational decisions when they were pulled into this? At least the original guys, whoever they were. But look at Prince as an example, right? He realized it was about his name. He changed his name to a freaking unpronounceable character to try to deal with it. And so really the system is foul. And one thing that I would like to point out is the idiotification, if that's a word, which it isn't, of the coming generations. What happened to us on steroids? Like, we were idified a little bit, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse as it goes along. But the people who show up now, who write complex music, who use key changes, who comprehend music theory, they are going to blow the crap that's on the radio out of the water. Now, we know the mainstream probably won't support that, but we're now living in look at me. I have a private website. The mainstream doesn't support me. I support me. And so there's this real hope that people who wake up from the dream can easily outdo what's being put out for the masses. And let's face it, I mean, what drives the world right now? It's freaking content, you know, and that's really the downside of AI, because now everybody's a freaking Rembrandt, right? Now everybody can write a book. Now and it cheapens it. And to just quickly comment on what Jason said, by the way, Mark, I'm pretty sure the thing that was sampled in the beginning was from the movie The Way We Were with Barbara Streisand. But to get back to the point, when you look, and I'll use the same example, you look at Lawrence of Arabia, real silver, whatever the hell it is, on film, an analog thing, filmed a real part of our world. And that kind of cinema magic is completely removed from where we've come. Now what you're looking at is an illusion, and your mind is programmed into an illusion to accept the illusion, to the point where, if you pay attention to modern movies, this thing, they used to hire people on sets to make sure the continuity was there. They don't even give a damn. I will all the time see the main character have a different shirt on in the same scene because they're screwing with people's illusory perceptions. The point I would make is that to get back to reality will shine like the golden sun when people get, back around to that. And that really, truly talented musician will shine far above the Britney Spears. Not to bag on Britney, because she, in my mind, she's a freaking victim. How can we not see what they did to that poor girl? And I think these are the key points, because we are not beaten, but we've had the shit kicked out of us. And they're continuing. They've put on steel-toed boots now to kick the shit out of the younger generations. And so to me, the real question is, how do we do better? And what you're doing here is the first step, because people have to recognize the problem to be able to deal. And I just wanted to add those things, because it's a far cry from an analog film filming something real in the world, regardless of the programming, to none of this is real. and yet your brain is accepting that there's a valid story here. Just to make the point.
I was at my young one were playing football, and two of the parents were talking. Have you been on one of those VR headsets, Dom? And I went, no, never been on one. I don't want to go on one. Oh, they're fantastic. I were on it for an hour or something. He said I came off, I was sweating like mad, and it was so realistic. This is what they were saying, and so a young child who's going to have that fried into their brain, that is going to be real to them, and we are living that. Is it Gran Turismo? No, Grand Theft Auto life. That is how youngsters are living now. It's like Grand Theft Auto.
Have you ever seen?
I can take that.
Have you seen a teenager? Like I said, I work with youngsters. Have you ever seen one of them on TikTok? That's a scary thing to see. I mean, I can't actually explain what they look like, but they've got them to the face like, and they're just their eyes.
Raymond Babbitt. That's what they look like.
And they're swiping.
Like Raymond Babbitt.
And I was watching a young girl over her shoulder. I'm like, what? Just seeing what she was looking at, and she's like liking these things, and switching to the next one, but so erratically and so fast. It was just, it was just, I don't know, it was quite disturbing.
5-second attention spans.
Yeah, and it's the same with films. I mean, the cuts and the edits in films now, they're so fast that you can't actually.
Huge thing you just brought up there, man.
Yeah,
huge.
They used to, you watch an old film and it's steady and it drags you in, and now it's just cut, and you dizzies you. You don't know what's going on half the time.
The 3-second edit, it's a social engineering tool that's been known a long time because your brain requires a few seconds to make up its mind, and when your brain is not offered that ability, it gives up, goes to sleep.
That's why you watch films and you think, I don't actually remember much of what went on in that. Because it hasn't dragged you into the.
Stanley Kubrick used to make a conversation last 15 minutes.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, again, like
and you enjoyed it, by the way.
Yeah, and you enjoyed it, yeah.
Like
Exactly.
you're saying about Lawrence of Arabia, and you look in the backgrounds, and there's camels and stuff, and you know that he's put them miles away to be included in that film. I mean, it's stunning stuff.
I guess a hope that we can have is the more garbage they make everything, the more it's going to cause some young people, certainly not most, to gravitate towards the sort of stuff that we do, podcasts of this nature, where we dissect all this stuff and put some perspective on it and try to make sense of it all. It's going to steer some in our direction. I would have hoped.
Well, some youngsters have eyes. My youngest, I think he was about 9 or 8 or 9. I was watching something on my computer, the planes going into the towers, and he came down. He went, "What's that?" And I went, "Oh, it's something that happened in 2001." So he went, "They don't even look like planes."
My daughter said, "You like this one, Crow?" My daughter said a while ago, "That can't be the moon. It's daytime."
It's a disc of light in the sky, not a lump of rock.
That was a funny one, actually. Oh, sorry. Can I go on about this on Mark? Sorry. It's I was going to say at work. This has happened a few times. The sun's up high in the sky here. The moon's up high in the sky here. And I was asking the youngsters at work. I said, "This isn't right. This doesn't make sense. If the sun's there and the moon's there, that means 80% of the world's in darkness, according to popular science."
According to Brian Cox.
Yeah, and I got all the kids outside looking, and they're like, "That doesn't make any sense." And I'm saying, "No, it doesn't. It doesn't." So yeah, I can drive.
Not only that, but they can see the same thing in Australia as you can in Britain at the same time. That's crazy.
I can't explain it, but yeah. I got them questioning it though. At first they poo-pooed me, then after a while they're like, "That is really weird."
You got to be careful with that, because then they'll start saying the Matrix was right, and then they start going down that wrong path. Nature
that's
is
a hugely important thing. That's a hugely important point that you just pointed out here. When we look around, we see these inconsistencies in the descriptions we're given of this world we live in. And now in the modern era, what I see very largely happening is we're being steered from an analog system directly into a digital system. And I mean across the board with everything. So human perception is being altered in this way. So what we recognize and see as real, like if you look back at some of those old films like Lawrence of Arabia or some such thing, where they were shot on location in a real place, there's real camels, there's a real desert, this is real. Your mind recognizes that. This coming generation, their mind is not going to recognize that. They will have a very hard time distinguishing between what is real and what is digital, or between what's analog and what is digital. because that's the mindset that we're being steered into. And that's the same thing, like as you were saying with the VR goggles, it's the same type of thing. And you have these people, oh, it's so realistic. Really, no, it's probably not, but it's just your mind has been conditioned to accept this 4K reality that's presented on your screen as being the real deal. And that's the other thing. I mean, you see how the progression of the technology through time has given you better and better imagery on the computers and on the screens of various sorts. I mean, look at the resolution of the television sets and stuff today. Now, if you compare that and contrast that to, say, the television sets we had back in the 1980s, well, now you see a lot more detail on screen than you would have ever seen back then on those same television screens. And that's the whole point. It's like hyper resolution. It's hyper focused. It's digital. It's switching from the natural world to this digital artifact world. And that's what they're trying to get people's minds accustomed to. Same thing goes with the music, all the digital music and all the, blatant crap that they put out these days. There's no musicianship to it. It's all just digitally programmed. And now with the onset of tools like AI to bring this thing into further resolution, we're getting to a point where the human mind, and especially this younger generation, and this is the whole point, the younger generation is going to get to the point where they can't distinguish between reality and digital. And that's exactly what the controllers of this world want. Because if you could control somebody's perception, you control their reality 100% completely. And that's what they're aiming for. It's all about that 100% control. And we have to realize that much of the programming is geared towards the young. They don't care about us. I mean, let's face it, guys, we're in our 40s and our 50s. We're going to be on our way out in the next generation. So they're worried about programming this young generation, accustoming the young generation with these things. It's a shifting of the Overton window towards this more digital-based reality. And that's exactly what they're pushing and promoting. And they don't care if we see it and recognize it for what it is and are out here talking and trying to point this out. What they don't want is those young people to maybe tune into a podcast like this and say, hey, you know what? Maybe those guys have a point, and go look at it themselves. They don't want that. That's why we're kind of in this mode of censorship in the modern era where we're at, where they try to section us off into our own little private echo chambers.
Yeah. Just lost another YouTube.
Yep. That's the thing. We shifted from the TV generation to the YouTube generation, and now it's the TikTok generation. And through the course of time, with the use of the Overton window as a tool there, they've shortened the attention span to that of a goldfish, essentially. So the average teenage kid these days has the attention span of a goldfish. They don't know what to do with themselves if they have like a 30-second break or something in their screen time. They really don't. And it's a sad state of affairs, but you see it in society all around you. And that's been engineered that way on purpose.
Which you see, Wayne, I mean, I know you guys like your research, but you guys do long shows. We do long shows. But people on the TikTok generation, they just want a short snippet that tells them something. Oh, that's the truth. Bang. I'll take the next bit of truth. Thank you. They don't want to do the background to it and look into it.
And that becomes a problem for communicating between the generations, doesn't it? When you look at it from that perspective. So
that's what
I
the
think
social engineers, it's what the social engineers have always sought to do, drive a wedge between the different generations. They've been doing it since the 60s, well, long before that actually, but that was the masterclass in it. And you just said there that guys of our sort of age, they're done with us. They don't care about us. They just want young hearts, minds, and souls.
They actually found this out, Mark. I think it was the Second World War during the Dutch Hunger March, where they realised that there was emotional memory when women were pregnant with children. They found that kids that were born on this march, where they were basically starving, and there were pregnant women in the march, the kids that were born hung on to fat cells more. So they remembered that the mother was starving. So they realised that there's an emotional memory, going back to what Crow was saying about nostalgia. So they've tuned into this nostalgia thing before birth, pre-birth. We're talking about your born day, but pre-birth. And there was a group, I think they were called the Environmental Working Group, did a test on the placentas of children, or on children born. And there was something like 220, I think, don't quote me on the numbers, but it were over 200 chemicals found in the placenta that were hormone changing, etc. These were going into children before they were born. So forget the jabs that they're given. These were going in, and I think 180 of them were carcinogenic. And so they've known about this. They've changed emotions pre-birth, not after birth.
Fetus programming.
Yeah.
Yeah, the programming starts from gestation, essentially. And that's the whole point here. And it's done through a variety of different ways. I mean, you have a lot of different synchronized weaponizations that have gone on, and things with environmental pollution, the stuff they spray us with in the skies that now they're finally admitting, hey, we're doing this geoengineering thing. Thanks, guys. We knew about this since at least the early 1990s. Those of us that have been talking about it for a while. Thanks for finally admitting it's going on. But that's the thing. We get all these microplastics that are uptake into the cells, the cell structures of the very young, even from the time before they're born. So we have all these different modifications that have been made to us from these people in positions of power in this place. And they know full well what they're up to. They know that this stuff's harmful, yet they do it anyway because let's face it, they're a bunch of psychopaths, the ones that actually run the show. They think differently than you and I. They have a different attitude than you and I. And they don't love life. They don't love humanity. They have nothing but contempt for that. And I actually just did a show last night, recorded a show last night, talking about how this ideology has infiltrated the education system and taken over at the university level on down. And this ties back to Friedrich Nietzsche. Some of the things he was talking about, I read directly from Nietzsche's work called The Antichrist, and showed exactly what the attitude is of those people in positions of power in this place towards the masses at large, and how it is that they think, and how they think that we are little more than cattle. And they put this guy on a high pedestal. That's the thing. If you talk to anybody at some level in academia, at the university level, all these tenured professors and stuff like that, they worship this guy, this Nietzsche guy. And they put him on this high pedestal. And essentially, what Nietzsche talks about is steering us directly into transhumanism. It's exactly word for word, verbatim, the things he's talking about. He doesn't come out and say the word transhumanism, but he uses terms like Ubermensch or Superman to describe these things. And it's this ideology that's come across in the modern era here that is anti-theology. They're
Goes back to our
against
friends, the Huxleys, doesn't it, Dom? Again,
all these guys ran in the same circles. That's the thing. They all ran in the same circles.
Yeah.
They all got the big script and put out the big script here. But that's the whole point here. It's contrived and it's controlled from the top down. And it's gotten to the point where it's so infiltrated in all parts of society that it's unavoidable for the young generation, the younger generations, to avoid these programming motifs. That's the whole point. It's in the entertainment. It's in the music. It's in the education system. It hits them from every direction. And it's this synergistic working of the programming on all these levels, combined with the toxicity in the environment that is programming these people towards this digital era that's coming. And it's a steering us away from the analog natural world. And largely that's where they're pointing, and it's heading towards transhumanism. I sound like a broken record. I always say transhumanism.
Talk
There
about
it is.
programming. Try and buy, I've got a 5-year-old, try and buy a kid's pair of pajamas that hasn't either got dinosaurs on it, spaceships, or unicorns and rainbows. Literally, they don't exist.
there you go.
Yeah, it's all fantasy-based
subconscious,
stuff.
yeah, subconscious part. There's another problem with what's about to happen. The metaverse, they've thrown it up, they've thrown it down, they're doing what they do, but the VR headsets, this is where the real danger. This is like cocaine. This is like
100%,
Vicodin, because at some point the green and the blue in that visor will make it impossible for the human mind to accept at the same level nature's blue and green, because they've been so stimulated by the false representation. And that's really where the addiction, the reality or the illusion addiction will become a problem every bit as serious as heroin or any other addiction we've ever faced, maybe even worse, because then the world will have lost its luster. And anyone who grew up in my generation who knows what drug addiction is about recognizes that if you've been addicted long enough and hard enough, when you come out the other side, it's like a little bit of your sunshine has been stolen away from you. And you have to inch your way back, trying to get that little bit of sunshine back that's no longer in the world you experience. And this synthetic version, it's going to be clinically backed to do these very things, because once they get them in TikTok at that level, there will be very few who come out of it.
Right.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Crow was just saying, to tie this back to a more spiritual type concept, think about it this way. We have in the natural world, we have the light, the divine light. And in this synthetic world, you have the false light. And the false light always shines with more luster than the real thing. And that's exactly how it draws you in and gets you that way. So I hope you're picking up what I'm putting down here. Because there's a spiritual connotation attached to all of it as well. So it goes beyond just technology being a tool. It is a tool, but in the wrong hands, it's a tool that could cause a great deal of harm. And the people with ill intentions toward the masses are in control of the development of this right now. And that's wherein the problem lies. So just wanted to put that out there before somebody else steps in here. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on anybody there.
Well, no, that's a good segue into what I wanted to talk about next, actually, which is Crow has often spoken on his show of higher mindedness, higher minded pursuits. So I just want to talk a bit about what sort of things we can be replacing all that entertainment and all that disposable culture with, and, you know, other things that we can adopt into our lives to make sure that they're meaningful experiences, because nobody really left their mark in the world by listening to music or watching movies, but they did by doing other things. So do you want to jump in with this one first, Jason? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so for me, it's kind of easy because I am a singer-songwriter. So I don't consume anywhere near as much entertainment and media and all that, because I actually will sit down and play my own songs or work on something, maybe in my studio, like something I've been recording. So that's where a lot of my attention, that's not doing the actual production of the show that we do, which eats up most of my time. So for me, most of the time, it's just if I watch something or listen to something, it's usually older. Lately, I've been going back and watching the old Monty Python one at a time just to see if I ever missed any of them. And as far as
we're
I
living
know,
that.
Yeah, we're living in Monty
We're in
Python
it.
land, yeah.
That's for sure.
and that's very much a product of its time. There's jokes in there from the early 70s in the UK that I don't know exactly who they're referencing anymore. It's just too far removed. But it is what it is. You know, it's funny and it's basically ridiculous. But I don't see a ton of programming in there. I'm sure there's stuff. There's always stuff, but it's not like the over the top stuff today. So for me, it's a little bit different because I am a musician, that I spend most of my extra time working on my own stuff, which I think if someone's not an artist in some way, shape, or form, they should probably try getting out into nature more, or maybe just going to the gym or something like that. Like, focus on building yourself in a positive way. And there's nothing wrong with kind of doing something to take your mind off things as a distraction. Just be careful what it is that you put in your brain, because it's going to rattle around in there forever.
And Crow, you sort of coined that phrase, higher mindedness. What sort of things have worked for you?
I'm probably not a fair example because I grew up in a household with a very smart father, one of the smartest people that I knew. So I had a head start that a lot of people didn't get just by dint of having lived in the household I did. But reading is one of the biggest things that's getting lost. Reading is such a critically important part of knowing things. And you will notice that with the digital era, we can see the decline in books. I know very few young people. I do know a couple that read books. Almost all of it is done on the screen. For me, it's not the same, but I'm an old geezer, so I can't experience reading as a young person would on a screen. But without that kind of endeavor, reading we're going to be in a sad spot. If you look around today, you will notice that the younger generation, many of them don't know how many continents there are. Many of them don't know how many inches are in a foot. These basic things have not been given to them in the education to the state it's been given. And so the higher minded pursuits that I think fit most people is if you can find something that you appreciate. And I always use the book Dune as an example, because the first time that I came at it, I must have been in my young 20s and I didn't finish it. But as I got a little older, it draws you in and it does what it does. And it is programming. It's pre-echoing many of the things we're going to see, but it's also pulling up the veil to show how the world is run with a fantastic version of how it's done. But reading at a level like that is key to higher mindedness. You have to have something that gets your mind engaged beyond 2 seconds of TikTok. And this is the real problem. Many of the people who are content driven now, and you watch them, it's like our other guest was saying, the speed at which they're consuming content, liking and moving on. I mean, for them to sit down and read a single page of a book is, it's probably not going to happen. And the higher mindedness that I think we need back, it would be delivered through reading. I think people have to try to get their young to read. And for my money, I don't care what it is. If they want to read comic books, whatever they can get interested in to get the habit of reading, it doesn't matter. I mean, it does. You don't want them reading something that's not healthy for them to read. But if they want to read about dinosaurs, which we all know are nonsense, who cares? If they want to, just to get the reading, because without a vocabulary, without the kind of thinking that is required to read between the lines and pick up innuendo and the double entendre and all the things that you will find in a book, there's really not a good replacement for that outside the written word that I'm aware of.
Interestingly, Crow, sales of my audiobooks have now overtaken the printed versions. So most people, or more people than not, seem to want an audiobook version of the story. Then
Pink Floyd saw it coming. I think they wrote the song "Welcome to the Machine."
Right.
This is where we are, but I can't stress enough how critically important reading is. Of my friends who have children, some of them are now young teens. The brightest among them read, and the ones that don't, I don't want to say they're not bright, but they're not in the same ballpark. They're at a diminished level. And another thing is language. And the problem with talking about that is people think that it's a racist jibe. And I'm not a racist person, so that's just not a correct assessment. But language is key. Language is sacred. Language is how we make an idea out of nothing. It's literally magic. You are literally bringing into the world an energy, a measurable frequency that other people can hear and recognize the value within it. And that language is also on the chopping block without reading and with what modern entertainment is doing. I saw a movie listed the other day and I just kind of rolled my eyes. I think it was called She-Ball.
Oh,
so
boy.
you can see what's going on. And with language, the real problem with language is, say we have 3 generations where language goes down the tubes. The problem with that is, while Wayne and I or Jason could go research, I could take a word's etymology all the way back to however far, hundreds of years in some cases. The derangement of words and language and how we write because of digital devices, that can't be tracked to anywhere. That is a literal dead end. The only thing you can derive from it is that people like to say, oh my God, a lot, and that it's a dead end and there is nothing more than a platitude. There's no value. There's nothing to be researched. And so much of the language online is equivalent to that. So speaking correctly, learning to have a vocabulary, and reading without these things, we in fact will face an idiocracy. But I don't want to be all doom and gloom. This crap that's going on in the world's not going to work. It's going to fail. The problem is all of us here, we're alive. We got to deal with this right now. And probably, if I had to guess, in my lifetime, I'm not going to see the better time. Probably. Could be. It's possible, but it may not be. So I'm not worried about it anymore. I know the reality of where we are. But 50, 60, 70 years from now, a world will emerge that is going to appear almost magical. Probably between then and now, there will be a lot fewer people. The systems that we rely on, all those have to come apart now. These low vibrational systems from a bygone era, they're slowly all going to go away. What we have to contend with is the controllers, and that's primarily what we end up talking about because it's considered a source for the problems. But what they're doing is not sustainable, and nature proves that it's not sustainable. So this is all, it's not all gloom and doom. There is absolute hope, but for us older folks, unfortunately, the merry-go-round quit spinning a decade ago.
Just as an aside there, Crow's talking about the degradation of language. And Chris and Dom, this will probably resonate with you. There's a whole sort of subculture that's been created in terms of language for young people. My daughter's generation referred to it as roadman language. And I'm pretty sure it would have been engineered at Tavistock or somewhere like that. They've got, what do they call them? Gen Zers talking in a certain way. And it's all kind of, I swear down, brov, you get me though, in it though, and even lying, brov, you get me. And
I call it rude boy, Mark. Rude boy language.
Well, this is talk that used to come out of the council estates of London, but now you catch it out in the rural backwaters of Northamptonshire. And I swear down, brov, in it though.
Yeah,
and I'm sure that's all been engineered by design to have young people just sounding ignorant and dumb and unable to communicate properly.
Yeah. Well, to put a little more nuance on it, Fulcanelli describes language as the tool of spirit. So understand that there is a greater connotation involved with that. And this applies not only to the spoken word, but the written word as well. And there are valuable distinctions to be made between the two. And here's where we have a problem in the modern era. A lot of the young people don't want to read anymore, like Crow had alluded to. And that could be problematic because you miss a lot of the subtle nuance when you're not taking in this expression in the form that it was originally intended in. So if you write a book and you put that book out in audio format, well, they might miss some subtle nuance in what you were saying, because perhaps, and I use this example, I'll go back to the show I did last night, talking about the works of Nietzsche. In certain portions of his writing, he had italicized certain words to add some subtle type of point to the word. And you miss this when you're just listening to the spoken word. That's not inherent in that. But if you're reading it on the page, like for instance, he said our, like our, this is our imperative or some such thing like that. Well, who's he talking about with that our? Because he has that word our italicized. So of course he's making a connotation here that there's some specific group of people that this applies to, but not others. And you wouldn't pick up that subtle nuance if you just had somebody read the sentence off of the page to you. And this is where a lot gets lost in translation. Now, especially between the older languages and the newer languages, we have much information gets lost. If you go back to the old languages, the old Romance languages, as they call them, the Latinized or Greek languages, things like that, the ones that go back older, you have gender inherent in certain words. If you look at Spanish, French, any of those Romance languages, we have gender inherent in the word itself. That's lost in the English language. We don't have gender assigned to specific words here like they do in those other languages. And it's this kind of nuance that's been lost through the course of time. That's why it's so important to trace the etymology of words back to their original roots, because you might pick up some connotation that you didn't understand before with that. And here's the thing, these social programmers, they understand aspects of this and they use it all the time. And it's very subtle in the way they do things. So to dumb down the language is to dumb down the person, make them not recognize what they're being told or what they're saying about themselves. Like a perfect example here in the US, I don't know if it's the same over there in the UK, but oftentimes people will refer to their children as kids. Well, what's a kid? It's a baby goat, right? It's an animal, a herd animal. So you're identifying your children with herd animals when you do that. And that's some of the subtlety that's involved with language. And most people don't even ever think about that or don't even pick up on that connotation. That's
And why is everyone guys? You can go up to a table of women and go, "Hey, guys."
I don't
Precisely.
identify as a guy now, man.
Oh,
Are you identifying as a purple panda or some such thing? Anything's fair game these days.
Yeah, everything's up for grabs now.
So guys, though, I got to point out, if I'm not mistaken, is also used to signify a group regardless of gender. But I don't know
Well,
how
it is
far
now.
back that goes. Well, I think in my lifetime,
Always
it's
been.
always sounded funny for the reason you're pointing out, but I think in my lifetime, it's actually correctly used to describe a group. But
Right.
case in point, when girls call each other dudes, another version, or bro, they call each other bro. It's all programming.
You have
What-
that
what-
Americanism when you call each other dog. I've always found that quite strange.
Yeah. What up,
Well,
dog?
that's the same idea as what Wayne was just pointing out. You're animalizing.
Sure.
So what's funny about that is look at the example we had from culture. Old Snoop Dogg went out there and got himself famous, and then he realized, I don't want to be a dog. I'm going to be Snoop Lion. No, you're not. They're not going to let you be Snoop Lion. You're going to remain Snoop Dogg. There is gravity behind these ideas and what they mean.
Another form of shortening language, which they do, the mobile phone, the texting, and all this is a shortened language, even to a point where we did some research on emojis, didn't we, Chris? And the emojis were started by, but it was AT&T, which was Graham Alexander Bell, which showed up in the book that you put us in touch with, Crow, and Graham Shelby Down on Jekyll Island. So their company, Bell Telecom, became AT&T, and they basically started up the emoji craze. So
It's basically eradicating language to a small image.
Yeah, and it's the smiley face. The smiley face was used in Acid House.
T-shirts.
Yeah, Acid House T-shirts. It's used all over the place. Forrest Gump.
He made fun of it, right?
Forrest Gump.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Didn't he wipe his face with mud? And that,
Yeah.
That was, the whole peace sign. There's a similar story behind the peace sign.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. So all of these things are intertwined in this fabric of the matrix, aren't they?
Geometry has energy. That's all there is to it. And a letter is geometry. A number is geometry when written, when expressed. And that's the whole reason that cymatics has been hidden away. And to some degree, I think it's what Mark was talking about earlier when people say things like bruv.
Fam, cuz.
Yeah, and we have it here too. Like people will say teeth instead of th with an f. And well, you can speak the way you want, but the problem is a young person that's taught to say teeth. How do they learn to spell? When they sound out the word to spell, they're making an f. So
you should come to Yorkshire, Crow. You would struggle then. We missed plenty of words out.
Well, part of it's cultural too.
Yeah.
Part of it is cultural. There will be cultures that do things because it's culturally part of what they're doing.
Yeah.
But here, that's a different thing. It's the N word. The use of the word nigger is a prime example of social engineering at the highest levels, because what they did is they convinced white people that they were all responsible for things that happened hundreds of years ago, and then they convinced Black people to insult each other and to denigrate each other, and it's also
now Asian
clever.
dudes use it as well.
Do they? Do they really?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, they do in the UK, yeah.
And when we say Asian in the UK, we mean Indian and Pakistani guys, not
Bengalis, Pakistanis, yeah.
Yeah, in America, Asian means Chinese and Vietnamese and things like that.
Right.
But see, that's another fascinating thing when you really think about it. We speak the same language. We all speak English here, right? But there's just nuance in the words depending upon the part of the world you're in or the culture that you're surrounded by. So like you're pointing out here, something that we would construe completely differently here in the States than what you did there. And it's important that you point that out, because I wouldn't have known otherwise. I would have been thinking of Chinese and Japanese people doing that and thinking, wow, that's kind of strange. But so that's the other thing too, because of the separation between these different cultural barriers between us.
Well, if you talk about,
even though we speak the same language.
If you talk about smoking a fag in America, it means quite a different thing to what it means in Britain.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So it's
really
strange.
Bad thing I've noticed.
That has to do with learning language too, though, because originally a faggot is a bundle of sticks. Sorry, Jason, I think I stepped on you there.
It is a bundle of sticks. There's something I've noticed happening very, very often that makes me think people just must not read books anymore. Instead of texting or typing out could have, they're saying could of. Like, well, what the hell? That makes zero grammatical sense. I see it so often these days. And if you read normal literature and on any regular basis, that wouldn't be programmed into you to make such a blatant, gross mistake over and over and over again. But you go on Facebook and you just see it everywhere. So that's just a very big example of how the language is getting bastardized.
And a lot of people say anything instead of anything. That drives me crazy when people do that.
Again, all this stuff was in George Orwell's 1984, wasn't it? When they were rewriting the dictionary and reducing the language, therefore reducing the thought process, so they can't express themselves.
That's TikTok.
Yeah, exactly, Justin. Yeah,
that's just, it's that concept, but applied in a more what would you say? It's a more technological way that they're dumbing people down, but they're doing it in the same thing. They're not going to be able to express themselves because their freaking attention spans.
And then we get to
5 seconds, they're on to the next thing.
Get to a point where they don't even read at all. So then that's gone.
Well, there's a stated goal. I think Jason and I covered it, but I don't remember the source at this point. I think it's Tavistokian. There's a stated goal to get all words commonly used in language down below, was it 1,500 words? That was the goal, to stupefy everybody. And what's interesting about that is most people are not aware that Don Quixote, Dante's Inferno, the Canterbury Tales, is that right?
Yeah.
Canterbury Tales, those were all written in an effort to protect the complexity of language because it was being lost in those times. I think Dante's Inferno is one of the earliest, if I'm not mistaken. So this tool's been on the chopping block for a long time. If you think back when the royals supposedly were in charge, do you know how hard it would have been for a commoner to infiltrate anything? They couldn't. Their language prevented them. As soon as they opened their mouth, they were done. They were part of their permanent casting had to do with their ability to speak.
Right. And this goes across the board to the written word too. I think Orwell is quoted as saying, if you can't write well, you can't think well. And if you can't think well, somebody else will do your thinking for you. So this is an important thing that we need to keep in mind. And much of the younger generation, they're not taught how to write well, even to the point where they're not even taught cursive, to write in cursive anymore. This is something that I see. Actually, my children are learning cursive in school, strangely enough. They do homeschool.
Yeah, my son did
now.
as well, Wayne. My son did.
Yeah, but for a time there, I mean, especially when my oldest son was going to school, they stepped away from teaching them cursive. So it's something that if you can't read it or write it, well, you're going to lose a huge treasure trove of information, the ability to comprehend that information, because many of our founding documents here are written in cursive. So if you look at the original document, who's to say if you don't understand the writing there, it's like speaking a different language. So somebody will interpret it for you and tell you what they say that it means, and you have to take them at their word for that. And this is something that's been kind of programmed into the younger generation these days. And it's the same thing with this whole loss of language, the loss of words, the loss of vocabulary. And we are at this critical place in society right now where we're at the precipice of losing a whole lot of information, valuable information, for those future generations that come. And it's sad that they're being engineered into this stupefied state of mind, this, loss of vocabulary, this loss of nuance in language, this abbreviation type of culture where we use the devices and we'll do things like LOL, and people understand what that means now. But in future generations, if they've never heard somebody say laugh out loud, they'll just think of LOL. They'll know what it means, but they won't have any clue that it at one time meant something else. And this is where language gets butchered through the course of time. And we wind up with some of these strange types of dialects that we have. So it is an important tool here to realize. And like I said, there is a spiritual significance to the idea of language. And that's a nuance that's lost on most of the culture these days. Yes, we communicate, but the problem is that communication has become very base, very primal, I guess, or stupid, just dumbed down, stupefied, I guess is the best way to put it. You can't articulate complex ideas with simple language sometimes, and that becomes a problem.
We're the guardians of all of that, our generation. It's on us to preserve all of that, because if we don't step up and do the job, there might not be a generation after us to do it. So that's a sobering thought.
They did name them Generation Z for a reason.
True.
Yeah, what comes after Z?
Exactly.
That's the whole point.
Yeah. Good point. As we start to finish up then, let's hear from each of you as to where listeners can find your own podcasts, and also a bit about the type of subject matter you've been focusing on recently and what sort of stuff you've got coming up. So we'll start with Dom and Chris. You've got this Huxley family series that you're doing, and I know you cover a whole load of other stuff in your shows. What are some of the general themes that have been coming through in your broadcasts of late?
Well, last year we concentrated on the World Economic Forum. I did a full dive on our friend Klaus Schwab, where we pinpointed his genealogy. And it was quite an interesting one, a bit freaky. I don't know if any of you guys remember that interview flying around where he was at the Harvard Business Center, where he said they'd infiltrated the governments of the world. If you remember that one, that guy I was interviewing was an interesting guy, and I traced his genealogy back to one of the founding families of the US. So here we have those two characters there. Anyway, so yeah, the World Economic Forum.
And Schwab was in 9/11 in New York.
He was sat having a coffee with a
Jewish rabbi,
the leading Ashkenazi rabbi, watching events unfold.
Right. Yeah.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
And nobody had ever heard of him until sort of 15, 20 years later.
No. The story, it's just one of those other stories where he's been backed by all the people like Kissinger, Rockefellers, all the way through, just to set this organization up to press the button right as we're talking now. But we did all the young global leaders. You'll have heard of the young global leaders, like Trudeau was one of those. So we traced Trudeau's
not very young,
back.
are they?
No.
Only went into the Schwabian name fight because
Schwabian name, yeah.
You realise there's a Schwabian art movement. There's Schwabian military bases in America. I realised recently.
There's New Schwabia in the so-called North Pole.
Schwabian Castle in Italy, I think I saw it.
Yeah, there's lots of Schwabian things. Yeah. But yeah, so the Trudeau's background, who was a young global leader, who they placed in charge in Canada, he was
of Madonna.
A cousin of Madonna, but his grandfather was a Sinclair or a Sanclair, came over with the Normans, their genealogy, that built the Rosslyn Chapel of Da Vinci Code fame. And they were part of writing of the Scottish Rites of Freemasonry. So now we know why he's in place. Anyway, so we were doing a lot of the World Economic Forum last year. This year, I've set out because it's me who normally dives into all this stuff. The Brave New World Order, Huxley's Brave New World Order, which is covering a lot of different subjects. We're covering the Doors, covering George Orwell, because Huxley taught George Orwell at Eton College for a time. We found out George Orwell was a dark occultist. Yeah, of course he did. Yeah, he was a dark occultist, was George Orwell as well.
Yeah. Well, some people contend that he never actually existed. in the same way they do about Shakespeare. So who really knows?
There's only a couple of pictures of him, Mark. It does get very weird.
There's
And
no
it's
audio
convenient how
recording.
he died 2 years after penning 1984.
There's no audio recording of him, and he worked for the BBC during the war, and there's no video, film or audio recordings of him. So we came to that conclusion, sort of at the end, didn't we, Chris? That did this guy? He may have existed at the beginning, a bit like the McCartney story, but then probably didn't either survive or didn't want to go along with the plan.
And also, his books changed because he was writing books about social situations, and all of a sudden he wrote Animal Farm in 1984. And it was like they used his past as an excuse to write these books, but it kind of tied him more with his wife, didn't it, Dom? It seems.
Yeah, well, his first wife, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, and I'll finish on this and let the guys.
Was she Irish?
No, she came from the northeast, so they're even harder to understand than we are. She came from the northeast, and she was called back to her school. It was 50 years old at the time. It was a year before she met Huxley. She was 29, and she wrote a poem because they wanted to write a story about what it would be like 50 years in advance, and that year happened to be 1984. So she wrote a poem called 1984 a year before she met George Orwell, but it all happened organically.
Yeah, just the way it goes.
So all these interesting tidbits will be probably in the next release. But it was called End of the Century, 1984. It had 3 verses: Death, Birth, and Phoenix. And it mentions Aldous Huxley in it.
Right.
And she didn't even know George Orwell at that point, apparently.
I don't know if you answered Matt's question there.
I didn't answer anything there. Nothing.
You just went off on one.
I went off on my Raymond Babbitt mode then. Sorry.
Upcoming themes. More of the
Upcoming
same.
themes. We're in that. Yeah, more of the same. And you can find us at sheepfarm.co.uk.
All right, cool. Crow and Jason, you get into a ton of subjects. What are some of the overriding general subject areas that you tend to cover?
Go ahead, Jason.
Well, we definitely have a variety. Law was a big thing for us for a while, although we've kind of beat that one to a pulp. But we still go back on it when it's necessary, when we have something new to contribute there. We've been doing a lot of historical stuff. Crow, of course, is massively huge into the sky clock and anything to do with that history and pulling it apart and pointing out where there seems to be poppycock, that kind of thing. Lots of
when
social...
he's not break dancing and spraying graffiti, right?
Social engineering is a big thing for me. I always go back to that because it's what they do to us all the time, every day, nonstop. So wherever we have something we can point out so that people have something new to think about and be like, oh yeah, that's right. They're trying to screw us there too. Well, there you go. That's what they're doing.
All right.
There's a whole world I just want to mention before we go. There's a whole world that we have been, I don't want to say deprived, but we've been led not to recognize. And it's the only place where there's no lie, and that's nature. And as an example of this, I had to put in a well, and I decided I'm going to find out if dowsing is for real. I've seen it done. I'd never tried it, and it works. I went over my wellhead with my copper dowsing rods all over the yard. It crossed in 1 or 2 places. I went all around my wellhead. Nothing happened. And as soon as I got over my wellhead and there was a radius, it did it. And I marked another place where there would be another thing. But the point of that is if you stop to think why that works, that is what has been hidden from us. Every synthetic system we ever see, all these things that are put in front of us are leading our minds from the truth. All things have energy. The reason the dowsing rods work is because there's energy that's being measured or recognized. Every shape, every word, everything has an energy. And that's really what we need to get back to. And by the way, did you give out our website, Jason?
Not yet, so go ahead.
All right, you can find all our work, everything at this point is at Crrow777Radio.com. That is CRROW777Radio.com. And All social media beyond that, to include Rockfin, is just a commercial pointing to the privately held website.
All right. Let's go to Wayne. What have you got on your podcast?
All right. Thanks again, Mark, for having me on here. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure speaking with all of you. My podcast is called The Alchemical Tech Revolution. It's available on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you find podcasts. And generally, what I talk about is I go back and I find some of the oldest books I can find tied to the occult secret societies. And I will tell you their own words, what they say, the claims that they make. And I'll give you my breakdown and opinion on the things they say as to the accuracy thereof and as to the nature thereof. So I tie all of the modern agendas that we see back to, well, let's face it, the occult, back to what is known as the mystery schools of antiquity. And this is where all of these different ideas derive from. So invariably, wherever you go, when you look as far back in time as you can, you will always come back to these ancient mystery schools and these occult teachings and these occult fraternities. And as far in the future as you go and you can find, you will find the end of this whole scenario with transhumanism being in central view. So I connect the dots for people primarily between those two subjects, the things going on in the modern world today and their ties back to the secret society groups. So that's primarily what I cover there. I can also be found over on Rockfin. That's ROKFIN.com/Wayne McRoy, where I do live streams and stuff like that there and post connections and links to all my other work. So that's primarily where I could be found. I also, if you're more interested, if you're somebody that enjoys reading, the alchemicalbeacon.substack.com, I can be found there too. I post articles there as well all the time. And I do like Substack as a platform. It is free of censorship at the moment, and it's a good place to go that offers content. And they're adding all kinds of new different tools for communication and social media type tools there all the time. So that's a good platform as well. Thanks again, guys. It's much appreciated.
No worries. And just before we do go, has anyone got any favorite quotations or maybe song lyrics that you feel suit the tone of the show that we've done today? If anyone's got anything, feel free to chip in.
Where are we going? What's the use in knowing by Marvin Gaye?
What was that Mark Twain one? If you want to conduct the orchestra, you've got to turn your back on the crowd. I always like that one.
All right. Jason, you must have a rock lyric there somewhere.
The only thing that comes to mind right at the moment is, there will be an answer. Let it be.
I like from Led Zepp, as we've been talking about them, from Stairway to Heaven. Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. I love that one. Anything from Crow?
He's going to do some Snoop Dogg.
Here you go. Here's mine. It is said that what is called the spirit of an age is something to which one cannot return. This spirit gradually dissipates. That this spirit gradually dissipates is due to the world's coming to an end. For this reason, although one would like to change today's world back to the spirit of 100 years or more ago, it cannot be done. Thus, it is important to make the best out of every generation.
All right.
Who was that? Crow, Grandmaster Flash.
Book of Samurai.
Sorry, I'm not being.
No, Drake.
It was really good. Yeah,
Crow,
yeah.
I actually have that book. I bought that years ago. Was it written by the guy who was a samurai, and it became illegal to be a samurai, and he couldn't commit seppuku, so he became a monk.
I think it's attributed to a man called Tsunetomo. I can never say it. Tsunetomo Yamamoto. I always just say
You
Yamamoto.
say that better than I would, Crow. There.
But
Did he become
also
a monk? Did he become a monk and then
Yeah,
write
I
about
think
his
so.
samurai days?
It's called Hagakure, but there's also the Book of the Five Rings, but that's different. It's about a guy who killed a lot of people and then recognized that the ultimate warrior's goal was not to kill. That's a different book, but this is Hagakure, or the
I've
Book
got
of
that
Samurai.
one. Yeah, that's the one I've got. It's
Read it.
I went through a bit of a samurai Japanese obsession phase and I bought it in but yeah, it's good because he tells stories about being a samurai, but he wasn't allowed to kill himself. And he was a lot of them went off to be monks, and he wrote all his samurai days down in his journals. I think that's it.
What's interesting about all these monks is places all over the world that had no contact seemingly at the time, through meditation, discovered the same things and described them in a different language and in slightly different ways, but it's the same proven thing. And they all did it in meditation and through spiritual endeavors, proving once again that there's no lie in nature. Language, culture, geography, none of them could change the truths that were uncovered, one country to the next, from Tibet to Japan to everywhere.
It's always amazed me when people have been inventing things around the world, whether it's pyramids or anything, that they were all done at a similar time period. Even with aeroplanes or whatever.
You get two films coming out at the same time about the same subject. That's always been quite odd.
Synchronicity. That's what that's called.
Yeah, absolutely.
On a lighter note, though, it's always fun to make Crow say words that are hard to pronounce. Crow, what's the name of those two stars in the claws of Scorpio, please?
You think you're going to F with me today, my friend. Not only will I tell you the two stars, I will tell you what they mean. You would be referring to Zubin el-Shanubi and Zubin el-Shamali, which would be the northern and southern claws of the scorpion.
See that? I always have fun with that. Got to make Crow say Zubin el-Shanubi at some point. That's always one of my goals.
I don't even want to say that. It scares me.
Schlemizel, Schlemazel, Hassan Pepper Incorporated.
Have you noticed how the goodbye section on some of these shows lasts longer than the shows themselves?
Case in point, goodbye.
All right, gents, thanks for joining me today. It's been a great conversation. I'm sure the listeners are going to find a lot of value in it. So
thanks for having us, Matt.
All the best. Catch you again.
Nice to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you.
Bye-bye.
We'll have to do it again soon. Cheers. I was saying cheers long before Crow was.
You weren't even a twinkle in your daddy's eye the first time.
Well, cheers was invented on these shores, not the TV show, but
See, the TV show might even precede your ability to say cheers.